I am going to invite Felicia to introduce herself. I know all three of our panelists, so I also just want to add my own commentary before each of them introduces themselves. So Felicia, as most of you know, Felicia has held many roles: local gov, state government, federal government. My favorite thing about Felicia is how every presentation I've ever seen her give, she has the most amazing analogies or metaphors, or like there's always something interesting and entertaining. There's one with an elephant in it. I wish I could retell it myself. I never would do it justice. But Felicia is great at providing good just ways for you to access complicated information. So, Felicia, what else would you like folks to know about you
Oh
today?
yeah. Well, that's because I'm from the Valley and I'm a simple person. I'm like the designated regular person in all those roles. No, I've just had an unusual opportunity to work in a lot of different places, including having I always say my karma ran over my dogma. If you remember that pin from the 60s, because I think about 5 times I've been given a job that I didn't ask for to fix something I used to criticize some agency or entity for not doing, and someone said, okay, you do it. And it's always harder than it looks from the outside. So it's given me a certain amount of humility. But I like to come at things from, if of all my jobs, actually, having directed the LA Public Works Department is probably the most seminal one because it's in operations. Same is true of farming. It's where the rubber hits the road, and it's not just the talking class who's trying to make somebody else do something. It's where you realize how incredibly hard it is and how there are so many dedicated public servants who get no credit for anything, but are just doing it despite being beaten up all the time and underpaid because they know every day they go to work and they're trying to make the world better. So that, I mean, that's sort of my um, defining characteristic, I think. And I've also just tried to be I'm more of a social worker or anthropologist in the environmental world than a lawyer, which is my background. So I just think people are pretty interesting, and they all have a lot more going than we give almost all of them credit for, even the ones we want to hate.
So, moving on to Rick Roberti, whose name on the screen says Carolyn, but that is his lovely wife. And one of the things I love about Rick is Carolyn. She's awesome, a great partner. And so Rick, we've been working with Rick on our Upper Feather Southern California Watershed Framework test drive. And I would say Rick is very often the person in the room whose views and perspectives probably are least, have proportionately least represented. And Rick is very courageous in being honest and direct, which I'm sure he will be on this panel too. And it is such a valuable commodity these days. And so I really appreciate Rick joining us and bringing his thoughts and perspective on the world as a rancher in Sierra Valley and president of California Cattlemen's Association. And Rick, please share what you'd like this group to know about you.
Thank you, Debbie. Very nice. Uh, yeah, when Debbie and I first got together, we didn't know we'd become friends for one thing. Are we working together for a while? Uh, I've lived in Sierra Valley. It's a valley, the largest alpine valley in California. It's 40 miles north of Truckee, and we're about an hour west of Reno. I've lived here all my life. My family settled here in the late 1800s, so it's a lot of the things. It's most of the things I know are related to my valley right here. I have a lovely wife, Carolyn, and a couple kids, and we're a family ranch, raise cattle, and we are in the upper Feather River, the start of the middle fork of the Feather River, so water is very important. So when we talked about people coming to visit, it was piqued my curiosity, and I've enjoyed working with the group, and so I hope I can help today.
Thanks, Rick. And then Martha, I think the person I've known the longest in this wonderful panel. In fact, I used to sleep on Martha's couch in the early days when we were just young upstarts in the environmental justice community. And I don't know what to say about Martha because she's been my mentor and I followed her around my whole career. So I'm super happy to have you, Martha, and all of the breadth of experience and expertise you bring across also NGO, state, federal service, and all of the very thankless jobs you've done. So please go ahead and share with the group what you'd like the group to know about you.
Okay, hi everybody. It's nice to see some people on this call from various stages of my life and career. I see Paul knew me probably back in 1999, so he might beat you, Debbie. But yeah, I've always been focused. I had the privilege of working and organizing and advocating around many environmental justice issues, a lot in the agricultural space. And I more recently, in the last 15 years or so, have been able to work in the government side of things and use that knowledge to, I think, increase some of the equity in our state and a little bit on the west side of our nation, even though that's all gone in a different direction now. So anyway, I have two children. My daughter just started at Arizona State. So I wanted her to go to Tucson, but she ended up in Tempe. And I have a son who's 15 and is a really amazing water polo player. So that's me. And I have my husband, Fernando, who's been a great pillar my entire career.
Great. All right, so I know some folks have been joining us as we've been doing introductions. If you haven't already, please feel free to put your name, where you're joining us from, and your organization in the chat. And just a quick refresh again, we're going to do a discussion on this front end of the workshop. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And then in the second half of the workshop, we will be breaking folks into groups and actually digging in, rolling up our sleeves, and talking about how you grasp opportunity out of chaos. I'm going to open us up with a quick framing within the context of our Watershed Solutions Network's curriculum and values around systems thinking. And I'm going to start by just reminding or introducing the concept to folks that that chaos may feel like disorder, but actually it's the breakdown of an old pattern that makes way for new possibilities. So you can take just a second and think about moments in your life where you felt like everything was completely out of control. And, maybe you didn't know what your job was going to be or where you were going to live or, where you were in that moment of pure uncertainty. And then imagine what came next. Almost always those moments allow opportunity for something new to emerge. And so it can be easy to get stuck in the fear and the discomfort and the lack of control. But if we can relax into it, resist the resistance, stay open. Oftentimes, moments like these are the beginning of a transformation that, looking back in time, we might say, thank goodness, which is, I know, very hard to imagine in the moment for most of you. But I'm asking you for the next, I don't know how many minutes we have left, but for the remainder of this workshop, to do your best to be open to the idea that there is a whole universe of opportunity in this moment to transform things for the better. So we are going to start with asking ourselves, how did we get, what has created the chaos? We are going to spend just a very little bit of time on this, really with an eye toward establishing where we are right now, so that we can think about where we might want to get to together. And so within the context of systems theory, the kinds of things that can trigger conflict, sometimes it's unexpected interactions of interdependent parts of a system that can seem very tiny, but then create what's referred to as the butterfly effect, where something very, very tiny creates turbulence or perturbation, and then all of a sudden things start oscillations happen and things start getting out of control, and suddenly you're in chaos. External shocks like wildfires or floods or pandemics, or COVID, that suddenly stop systems from functioning the way that they used to. And I imagine we can all think through like where there were things that we lost and things that we gained after going through the pandemic. Internal contradictions and tensions. So sometimes systems start to lose their balance because there's a conflict between the values and goals of the system and what's actually happening, or the values and goals of the elements of the system start to shift, and then that causes a need to shift what's happening in the system. Sometimes feedback loops go wild. This is the classic example is population crash, where too much of a good thing. So the rabbits overpopulate, and then there are too many of them for the coyotes to, that whole or not evolution, what is it? That whole system of when everything's in balance, it works great. But then when something goes out of balance in a system, it can cause feedback loops that can cause the system to crash. And then information overload or breakdown. So it could be that things are happening too fast. I might suggest that we might be here when you think about climate change. There's too much change too fast, information overload, and then all of a sudden what you find is you've got outdated reactions that aren't able to adapt to the incoming information, and then that's where you get to the very edge of overload and breakdown. So just a few examples just to put our minds in that systems thinking. How does all this work? How do we get to these places and spaces to found our to create a foundation for our conversation? And then I'm gonna pitch it to our panelists, to our discussants. So if you had to posit a theory, how did we get to this moment?
I'll just throw something out. I think we're at a very much of an in-between moment. And I used to think if you looked at Thomas Kuhn, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, you read that in college, it's all about paradigm shifts. And part of his theory is that it's the old paradigm fights more vigorously and viciously at just before a paradigm shift. I'm not sure that's what's happening now. I thought perhaps it was, but I'm not so sure. But they talked about the Copernican revolution and the oppression of Copernicus, Galileo, and all that stuff by the church that felt its worldview threatened, of the Earth being flat and the U.S. being not so much the flat part, but the Earth being the center of the universe. And you end up with quite a reaction, and eventually facts will out and it settles out. I think we're in one too. I don't know how much of it is between generations, which may come, but I do think, I can think of a lot of system issues that are out there. Of course, thinking about water, I think about the Colorado River as being the greatest delusion that we have out there in terms of how long people have gone by clinging to the over 100-year-old notion of they either have their water rights or they have their equity, and they just are stuck in a room and can't get past it as 40 million people and 5 million acres of farmland are at risk of a real collapse because they haven't figured out how to do it. Same on Bay Delta. There were moments, Dave and I were part of the Bay Delta Accord, which was a moment of peace that he was a real leader in the 90s, and we thought we had ushered in a kind of a new era, and then it goes backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards, and now we're in an era of happy talk, but not actually making progress on resolving things. So I think we're just in a place where people are afraid of what they're going to lose, and they can't see what the opportunity is if they actually truly work together to get something done. But I think part of that is an overlay of fear because of the overall feeling that society is moving backwards in terms of kindness being seen as weakness, and some of our baser instincts being allowed to flourish, not just in the US, but in all kinds of places. So I think there's an overlay that makes it harder to see the opportunities. I know a little later we'll get to talk about specific instances that we've seen, but I just think we're in a time where there's so much, there's a pace of change, as you were saying, that's really fast on some things, and then there's a desire to cling to certain things that objective facts would say can't last. And so you've got this whole emotional bundle of fears that are drowning out the hope side.
Martha, how would you describe how we got here?
Well, I do think I agree in terms of the rate of warming that's happening, that's caused a lot of physical and environmental changes that we haven't adapted to quickly enough. Um, and the unwillingness to really be honest about that right now is incredibly frustrating from the ability for us to actually get a handle on it. But, you know, hopefully in this state we can lead on that, but it's been everything. I know we'll talk about groundwater and drought and how much greater that situation got with the warming. We obviously have the wildfire situation. And I think what is compounding for me, and I'll go back to also a little bit of academia here on a course I took in college around societies and revolutions, which was essentially the theory there was the unrest has come when people traditionally had lack of access to land. And I think our modern day version of that in such a populated reality that we live in now is the access to housing, and how all of these changes in the environment are making that worse. And so the opportunity to do some transformative change there is, I think, one area that's getting to the second part of this conversation. But I definitely think that there's some compounding issues around the warming of our climate and the lack of access to housing.
So Rick, from your perspective, boots on the ground, how did we get here?
Yeah, a little different probably than most of you because of where I've grown up. And I had a grandfather with a third grade education. I had a dad with an eighth grade education, and I managed to make it through high school. And I'm not apologizing for that. I had some great teachers. My grandmother and my dad both went through the Depression. Maybe some of you, probably not many of you, but I had great wisdom from some people who went through some very hard time, learned examples of what to do and what not to do by knowing neighbors and friends that did different things than my parents did, and a lot of them didn't survive. And my parents did. They went through droughts, they went through floods, they went through everything, but somehow or another, they were very smart people and hung in there. And one of the reasons they did, I think, is because they loved what they're doing. I think our country has lost that, and I hear that all the time when everybody's working for the weekend just because they don't like their job. I'm happy that most people I ask that question really do like their job, so it's not everybody, but I do love my job, and raising food is very important, and it has something to do with all of us because we all eat. What kind of food we eat that's up to us. So uh, our area has changed greatly because of several different things, one being wildfires. And now we're going through a wolf problem that has changed our whole valley to where everyone's very scared and very concerned that we're going to survive. So my problems are probably different. I like to talk about water being at the head of the Feather River, and we use water out of the Feather River at the beginning. So there's a little I can talk about with water. I think our country has lost vision because most other countries are planning 20, 30, 50 years out in advance, and we're having a hard time getting through the next year. So it's changed our kids. It's changed the way some of the things that our kids have today that we didn't have then. I don't know if they're all good because I think it's changed our work ethic and wanting to actually be a part of society instead of just survive and take a handout from somebody that may have more money than I do, so they owe it to me. So probably my perspective is different. I still think there's great hope for our country, and because we're a bunch of good people, I still believe. So my my perspective comes from more visible and watching around me than maybe being out in the world as much as some of the rest of you.
I think though, Rick, that's if I had to put my finger on it, one of the reasons why I love being up where you are is because you all still have that sense of community and knowing each other and a sense of common fate. And I think many of the rest of us have lost that. And I personally might locate where we went wrong right there in that kernel of fragmentation that's happened. So I appreciate you bringing that perspective. Keep bringing it because some of that is what we have to get back to.
Thank you.
All right, so we're gonna just shift gears. They're gonna grind for a moment, but let's shift from how we got here to where the opportunities are and where we'd like to get to together. So if each of you could just take a minute and just do your brain dump. I know you've probably been chewing on this since we did our prep call, and then we'll just dig into whatever topic has the most meat to it. Martha, you mentioned that you were already leaning into one of your examples. Do you want to start us off?
Well, I was going to attest to the fact by sharing examples that have come about through previous crises, but I don't have the full answers to where we're going to now. And I think all of us, maybe Rick, even earlier than Felicia and I, working on, obviously the need for groundwater management in the state and the opportunity that the continuous drought provided for that. And it was because of a lot of leadership from across, all of our society. I mean, tremendous leadership from the agricultural sector. Ryder Brothers was one of the top ones I remember, just like pushing. And many of you were there. And also, obviously, many of the water leaders throughout the state in recognizing the need to be sustainable for our own sake. So that was obviously, we could talk about that. And I know, Rick, you have even earlier experience with that. I wanted to share one that might be more unique than in the water one, which was during COVID. And during COVID, of course, ironically, I was at the Public Utilities Commission, and the irony part was for 2 years prior to COVID, one of the proceedings I was working on was how to reduce the level of disconnections of people getting disconnected. And it was about, depending on the time of year, it would be close to 2 out of 10 Californians losing their connectivity to electricity or gas. And so the legislature had directed us to look at that issue. And there were a lot of things that, a lot of barriers of why we couldn't reduce the rates, and a lot of concern about how to cover the costs of people not being able to pay their bills. And many of you water agencies probably have dealt with this as well. And we had such depth and analysis on the issue that when COVID came, we were prepared to really say, okay, we're gonna do this from a public health perspective of not disconnecting anyone. And end of the day was 2 years because after the commission acted, the government directed the state to do this, as a whole, to do the same. And so it lasted for 2 years that people were not able to be disconnected from their electricity. And I actually don't remember what the case was for water, but it might have been about the same. And we were ready to quantify that. We were ready to say, fortunately, the federal government at that time sent a tremendous amount of support to the states for COVID, and really say to the governor, here's how much it will cost to keep people connected. So, of course, that's not something. I think what it showed, though, what it showed people in general is that we, as a society, when we need to act to protect the most vulnerable among us, because statistically, the people who were being disconnected were the most, low income, and there are a lot of interesting demographic findings there of some potentially disparate impacts on populations, like Black Californians were disproportionately disconnected more than any population. So just the ability to be able to act swiftly and act comprehensively during that time was an incredible moment. And so now moving forward, we know we're capable of really dramatic things, such as not disconnecting people for 2 years. And we know approximately how much it costs, very approximately. And it just gives us ability to manage in a different way when we look at times, particularly now, and this is in moving forward, how much these costs are increasing given the wildfires and many other things, that we should be thinking bigger. And in that instance, the federal government was the subsidy to be allowed us to think bigger. But it did take a lot of initial leadership to make that decision without knowing if that full funding was going to be there. So there was decisions made that were not without risk, but in fact, we were able to show the public health benefit. So I'll stop there and let some of my colleagues share their examples.
I'll defer to Rick, so we should change the order up each time.
Saying I've been here through a lot, and the wildfires are one of the things that have been around us now for quite a few years. They've burned thousands of acres around us on 3 sides of us. Since the 1980s, I saw a change in how our government was taking care of our forests, and it was alarming to me that policy was basically just let it grow and don't do anything about it. So we knew this was coming, and it did. And I'm not saying people intentionally did this, but there was a lot of push from people that don't live here that were controlling what our forests were and became and have become. And it didn't change their lives at all, but it changed ours a great deal. It'll never be the same in my lifetime. So I think instead of talking about it, there is cause to get on the right track. Our forests were getting so filled up with brush and small trees, the big trees couldn't even grow. And so we knew that was coming. And then when the spotted owl farce took place, an excuse to do less, it didn't help. We have a reservoir, a state project reservoir that we get water from. It's only 50,000 acre feet, and it's not far from us. It's where it basically stores our adjudicated water until the time we need it. But over the years, I've been watching this, the inflow of this reservoir go down every year. But yet we were getting the same amount of precipitation through the year. So I knew what was happening it was being soaked up by lots of brush and a lot of trees that probably didn't need to be there because they were never going to grow where they were of any value. But after the fire went through, the Dixie fire went through, some 900,000 acres that was let burn. It wasn't just a wildfire. This fire became a man-made fire after they didn't want to put it out and they wanted to grow. We can talk about that later. Most people don't believe me that happened, but there was a let it burn policy that was devastating to some of our area. But what's happened since then is the water has returned back to Frenchman Reservoir because now we don't have all this, I'm going to just call it stuff we didn't need in there in the first place. It was not a clean forest, and manzanita and brush and stuff were just gobbling up the moisture before it get to the lake. So our small lake came up a couple thousand acre feet. Now, if we don't do something, then that's not going to change. But if a couple thousand acre feet of water came in this small reservoir, if the whole state was managed properly and was taken care of, we probably have more water than we can probably use most of the time. But until we start doing some things that allow that water to flow free, and I'm not saying rob trees of their water, I'm saying the trees that don't need to be there, if we would space our forests in the right proportion so that wildfire doesn't turn into these infernos and they burn more closely to where maybe our Native Americans did. I find it real interesting that when the Europeans were settling this valley and we were pushing our Native Americans out, even though they were being pushed out of the valley to the hills, when they would leave in the fall, they'd set the hills on fire so that it would burn all the undergrowth, and the big trees were fine. And we've gotten away from some of those practices. We can't go back to those practices right now because we just have more wildfires. But we need to start thinking more about coming back to some of the things that made our forests healthy. And we've gone a long ways from that. So I know there's some progress being made, but in our area, there's a lot of thinning and mastication that has to go on. And mastication is when a machine just kind of chops down all the brush, takes out the small trees, spaces the trees out so that if a wildfire comes, it's not probably going to crown as easy as it does right now. But every time we get a project going, an environmental group will shut us down and stall us. And we had a fire last year that almost burned another city, just like it did our town of Greenville. But they fought this fire hard, and it didn't get there. So we live in a constant fear of our small communities. And my town's about 900 people, and yeah, we don't have a very big voting block. And most people, we say not in our backyard, but we seem to get everything that nobody else wants in their backyard. And wildfire is one of them. So there's a lot of things we can do, and that's why I hope I can help, because I do have a different perspective than most people that are in urban areas.
And Rick is a very generous, and his family are very generous about inviting people up to meet and learn and build understanding. I've been while Rick's been talking, I've been imagining how this sounds to many of you. Um, One thing I'll just invite everyone, something that also is inspired by systems thinking. When you hear something and you feel that like your heart starts pounding a little faster and your mind is like the gears are grinding, just take it. And we teach this in our curriculum too. What's it called, Odin? What's the acronym for the curriculum we use when
Rain, rain, is it rain
rain? Yes,
or
rain.
yeah,
I should have
rain.
known.
I
I
just
should
used
have.
that the other day.
Um, but just take a minute, take a deep breath, and invite yourself to be curious as opposed to critical. And I have learned so much, and so have all the folks we've brought up to Sierra Valley from Rick and the other folks up in the valley. Sometimes what we think makes perfect sense from West Sacramento is totally, well, I'll just say it's dumb when you see the place, when you understand how the place actually works, etc. I invite you as we move into the discussion space to ask curious questions. How does that work? Why do you all do this instead of that, as opposed to you can't do that? Um, so thank you, Rick, for holding that space for us. Um,
Debbie, before Felicia goes, can I just add a couple points to maybe give some affirmation of what Rick was saying? But when I first went into the governor's office in 2011 and was briefed by CAL FIRE, there was over 100 lawsuits filed on the timber harvest plans that had been requested. which meant they were all enjoined essentially. And so I just want to share that because sometimes people don't understand the degree of prohibition that was particularly happening prior to, I would say there's been a large set of reforms over the last 15 years. And secondly, is that at that time, CAL FIRE did not allow for cultural burns.
Right.
And so there's been a huge transition and philosophy on that too. But just wanted to give a little bit of color to what Rick is saying from the regulatory side. We obviously saw it as well.
Yeah, Felicia, can I also add to this too?
Please.
One of the things when I first started working for the governor's office, planning and research, I was this water and rural affairs advisor or something like that. And rural affairs, I'm like, I know the valley, but I don't know anywhere else. So I did this tour driving around the state. And what I was shocked to find is that there is a huge amount of alignment across the same political diversity of perspectives in our upper watersheds that we lose when we get to our urban communities. So if you go to Sierra Valley, locally, your people are all on the same side, and from the big picture of what needs to happen, how the forest needs to be thinned. And so often it's the folks that come from the outside who are trying to set the rules for everyone that are filing the lawsuits, et cetera. So we have Rick here representing that, but Trina Cunningham, who's a tribal leader up there, would be nodding her head, and Forest Service up there would be nodding their head. So take it away, Felicia.
No, I agree. I mean, I was smiling so hard my face hurt as Rick was talking, just because I think that's one of the places where there's been a massive paradigm shift in how people think about it. And part of when I left the state board after a fairly tumultuous but exciting, depends on how much sleep I've had, period of time, uh, what I wanted to do is I wanted to think about what did I want to work on that gave me hope versus what broke my heart, and what did I want to work on that had the ability to move at this period in time. And where I went was nature-based solutions, and some of you know I wrote a whole paper on nature-based solutions, a lot of which was all about proper ecological forest management. And I almost in real time, you could see the shift at a national level, an international level, a local level, with a lot of heroes of that from tribes from everywhere who gained that recognition that the don't cut a tree people were oversimplifying what was happening, and that we had built up not just a nightmare for communities, but a nightmare for climate emissions that had overtaken fossil fuels worldwide. And it was recognized the international level, national level. Biden administration put billions in. The state started putting billions in from cap and trade and all that. Still a drop in the bucket, and we need more. But I was smiling also because I'm looking at Nick, who's one of the heroes of raising the flag on this and figuring out how to pay for it, but also how to pull together tribes, community groups, and local residents to do it. So that is definitely one of the areas that gives me hope, even though there's a long way to go. I also want to mention, just to make sure it gets on deck, and we can talk about it more, but I know we're going to move into the breakout groups, the incredible work, not just on SGMA, using the drought as an opportunity to finally move something that should have moved. We're last state to have a framework, and then we did a framework that honored local leadership with a backstop. So I think we may leapfrog quite a few of the other states if it works. And so far, halfway through, I think it's working pretty well if you're someone who actually has a realistic view of what it takes to make change at a pace that doesn't destroy agriculture in order to save it for people's kids and grandkids. But the other one is, of course, the human right to water, where the drought exposed this horrible situation where people were out of water, and finally got the media there, and the advocates were amazing, whether it was Donna Johnson or the Community Water Center or the Leadership Council. But it allowed us to create a framework where we could deal not just with those communities who were out of water, but with the ones who'd been drinking crappy water for decades and nobody gave a rat's patootie about it. And we ended up able to start a structural change that now they've carried forward, and it took a long time, where 900,000 people have water who didn't, clean water who didn't. It's amazing, and there's still another whatever it is 600,000 or 700,000 to go, but it's amazing motion. But the thing I had intended to put on deck in terms of where I went is this amazing ahead of the curve work that local communities are doing to deal with the climate adaptation they know is coming, despite the slowness of the international and the national arena, including NGOs, to recognize the importance of adaptation. Because there was a while where the environmental community felt that adaptation was capitulation, and you almost weren't allowed to talk about it. It was all about mitigation. Climate funders are still there, unfortunately. But I've had the pleasure of being able to work in the Bay Area on certain issues, but in LA in particular, which is my home community, where you've got people mobilized to do the biggest water recycling projects in the world, where you've got a measure passed that's going to give nearly 300 million a year to do multi-benefit stormwater capture projects, deal with flood control, getting water into the ground, greening the most park poor urban area in America, and then in the Bay Area, that folks banded together to deal with sea level rise, which is a huge threat in the Bay Area. 2/3 of all the economic impact of sea level rise on the entire California coast is in San Francisco Bay, which, if you think about it, makes sense because it's a heavily urbanized little bathtub. But they've gotten it together to create a governance authority and $500 million, not enough, but it's a good start, to use horizontal wetlands to try and buffer the force of sea level rise. It'll work better than seawalls, but you have to do it as a collective, and you also get recreation and all the other ecological benefits while you're protecting the most vulnerable communities. So those things are exciting. That's where a lot of the energy is, and where the state and federal government need to figure out how to help accelerate that work. So that stuff gets me kind of excited because we've been talking about all these things for decades, but the recognition of drought, the recognition of sea level rise, the can-do people from all across the political spectrum at the urban level are pushing to get these things. San Diego's got stuff going. I mean, Orange County was way ahead of everybody. They've already recycled 100% of their sewage, but it took them 30 years. So everybody else is kind of on speed. So, I'm seeing hope there, but I'm also seeing hope in the nature-based arena and beaver introduction and all of that. Again, is it fast enough? Is it enough? No, but at least the battleship is turned in a lot of places. So those things are pretty encouraging, but they still need a heck of a lot of help.
So I think we've described a whole bunch of instances where the right people came together in the right place at the right time and were able to grab, or maybe grab's the wrong term, we're able to make a leap together. Um, I think right now it's not clear how much space, how far we could jump together. Like, I think it could be, we're still in the phase where there might be modest, along the lines of beaver introduction opportunities. Could be there's like a bigger leap, like a Sigma kind of leap. Could be a whole-scale institutional transformation. I mean, it's really hard to tell from this particular moment here. Um, we are going to break into groups in a moment, but I want people to be thinking about what does this look like if it's the modest shift? What does this look like if it's the Sigma-esque shift? And what does it look like? What if the wheels come off the bus? What if we're rebuilding the vehicle from the ground up? What does it look like? What are the components? And what could we be doing right now to be laying groundwork? Really, I mean, Sigma is a great example of how bits and pieces were being cobbled together over decades before
Right.
Sigma became possible.
Yeah.
Again, absolutely the right people in the right place at the right time frankly, there are plenty of other folks on this call who were right there in it too, who may have a different perspective. But from my perspective, there was just the right amount of chaos going on. So a lot of the pre-work on Sigma was done without too much, people weren't really paying attention. It was actually perfect, kind of the moment we have right now. And then the right array of people were linked, had arms linked, ready to step forward, ready to take the leap together. And as we mentioned, I think before most of you got on, Dave was just celebrated yesterday for being one of those brave people who took a leap without any safety net, and is many people's heroes.
Well, and I've been sitting here listening to this, and I appreciate it. Martha played a very key role in that whole legislative
Yeah.
process, representing the governor's office and bringing a whole lot of people around the table. So I think she deserves, an applause, as well as dozens of others who are equally engaged in trying to do what we knew was right, even with opposition at home. I mean,
Yeah.
it ultimately cost me some chips with my board, and you may recall, Martha, I didn't get to negotiate the last week because my board said
Hold you.
stop.
Yeah.
Which but that's what you do. You do the right thing until it's done.
You've done
How,
that a couple of times, Dave, if you have a long enough view of it.
I mean, yeah, I think I don't know many of us who are on this call across all of our membership who haven't found themselves underneath the bus at one time or another. But I do want to say though, Dave, because you keep eschewing I think for most, and there were, I mean, Gordon Burns, I mean, Felicia,
Gordon,
Karen,
yeah.
Ross, I mean, it
Oh
was
my
a
God, Gordon
cast
was
of
amazing.
amazing characters. Nancy, who, I mean, really behind the scenes, none of this could have happened without Nancy. I think, Dave, why you keep getting singled out is because you were the one who really was bold and courageous. Like everyone else sort of was in their lane sort of. And you really took some risks and led in a way that I think is it's exactly the kind of leadership we're trying to inspire in Watershed Solutions Network. So yes, lots of people were
Thank
there,
you.
and you in particular were a hero.
Absolutely appreciate it. Thank you.
Um, so we are going to take a photo in a moment. So if you've got something in your mouth you're eating or whatever, please, wipe your mouth and get ready to turn your camera on. We're also going to share share a worksheet, which in true Watershed Solutions Network form, you can choose to use to generate discussion in your breakout group, or you can choose to just discuss what has come from the conversation so far. I really want to push folks. I mean, again, limited piece of your day, to really try to take off the limiting the bumpers that we tend to live in our day to day, and really ask yourself, like, what are the fundamental elements of the system of which we are all a part, that what are the values driving us, and how might we change the values and to get to somewhere else? Systems operate under a set of rules. What are the rules that are not getting us where we need to be, and how might we change the rules? Try to, especially for folks who went through the cohort experience and got that systems thinking curriculum, try to harken back to that and really think about what's going on, and what could we put in place? What do we want things, how do we want things to be transformed? We're going to do a popcorn around to the breakout groups and just get a quick sense of what folks were talking about. And so if you, hopefully, if you had a whiteboard and you saved it, if you could have that teed up to share with the group, I'm just going to open it up and ask a group to volunteer to share what you all were talking about.
Rick and Brooke and I mean, yeah. Anyway, we had a very rural breakout group. We had everywhere from Raleigh to the Yurok and Karuk nations, so that was awesome. And you already heard from Rick, but anyway, one of the themes was, actually a lot of feelings around not having enough population for sure, but coalition, et cetera, to have a voice in the policy decisions that are impacting their lives. And everything from, the national immigration policy that Miguel spoke to Brooke and the recent funding removal from NOAA, and Rick speaking about some of the new reintroduction of wolves and some of the harm that's causing. So we didn't quite get to the solutions part of the conversation, but I think one of the reflections I had in just hearing them is, how powerful their individual stories are, and the need, I think the acknowledgement, the need of how to communicate that within all this noise and within the relevant decision makers. So I hope I summarized that sufficiently well.
All right, how about the next group?
Odin, can we make you do it? Odin.
I'm here.
Okay,
Gosh,
thank you.
I'm trying to talk less in my life. Everybody always wants me to talk.
Oh yeah, and
Um,
none of us were talkers in our
no,
group.
you weren't at
None
all.
of
You
us.
weren't
Yeah,
at
we were
all.
all
You were
just
very
quiet as
such
mice.
shy, retiring, shrinking
Yep, yep,
violets.
that's it.
Um, so we had a great conversation, and a lot of it was the balance of the fact that there is so much chaos and uncertainty, and what actually is the antidote to that. And Debbie and others who I've worked with, you'll not be surprised by the fact that, and it wasn't just me, it was everybody. Like, we really settled on this idea of relationship, trust building, like, given all of the fear and uncertainty that's out there now, what we need to be doing, and it's not for all of us, we know this, it's not a cultural inclination of the culture in which we are working right now to be building relationship and building trust. It's like, do what I say, or I want this and I want that. And, Felicia and Kimmery and David, and, we were all sharing stories of just people like butting heads because of this, like, both uncertainty and this need to grasp onto things because of that uncertainty. So I think when the chaos goes up, it's like the trust needs to go up as well, because that's really all we have to be able to weave some agreements and some understanding. And I think the other thing we mentioned was really being place centered and place focused. And I talked about how WSN is really rooted in that because of the way that water and land work together,
Mhm.
and that even over a large scale, like Kimmery, and others, work in the Colorado River Basin, like, even there, like, being able to link places together where there's still this richness of place. And, WSN does this, just in the, like, starting to think about, like, different specific locations, both in the cohort model and then other programs that have emerged. That's just so vital for providing this sense of, like, comfort and certainty. And I think, like, a lot of, like, I was really inspired by what Rick said earlier, just about, like, this is what I know, like, this is my home and I know this really well. And I think we need to rely on the people who know those places and then forge connections and agreements with them. Did I miss anything,
Good job.
group?
I wonder if the group I was in would like to go next, because I feel like our conversation was parallel. And I did save the whiteboard, but I also, like Martha, can't figure out where it went.
That's
We need to
pitiful.
get better at our tech. I swear it used to go somewhere that it's not going to now, but anyone from my group willing to step up? Ren, Sharna, Amanda.
Who wants to go? Well, we talked a lot about uh this place that we find ourselves today, where there's a lot of chaos, and how that's impacting some of us personally. I share, just I'm similar to where Rick is at, and kind of a similar community. Um and I and uh Ren had some very, wise words of, trying not to control things that really are out of our control, and trying to find places where we can meet people and get that trust built back. And often that's lost in how we communicate now, and all the social media platforms, and just trying to come back to those things that we all know, and why we're here in this room to begin with, is that connecting with people is really where much of that fear and anxiety can be broken down, and get back to what's really important, and that's our relationships with ourselves and our community, and the place that we live. Amanda, anybody else, feel free to add on. I'm
In Francisco, I
in
should also,
Francisco,
yeah.
yes.
Well, I think we talk about feelings um, and being hopeful that something good will come in the future, because what we are trying to do is a good thing. It's something, it's helping people and the environment, and despite the uncertainty and difficulties, we just have to keep working and find that hope, you know. At least that's what I share, and I think in a way it was shared in a different way by everyone in the team. It's certainly a difficult time, so we recognize that, but finding the opportunities and the hope. I guess hope is what we will keep us going, and giving 100%, as or 110% or 150%. Uh, so anyway, yeah.
I see thumbs up. Okay, from Ren. I would say too, though, likewise as Sharna, I think Ren, Ren has some deep thoughts on this. So if you get a chance, have a chat with Ren. Um, who else do we have to go?
I'll go ahead. And in our group, it was myself, Avra, Eileen, and Nick. And so we had some reflections. I guess one thing that we had talked about is, what Rick had said in terms of the importance of the community, and to start, that is the nucleus of where your stability could happen. And like Rick was saying too, like his family and his community weathered droughts, weathered floods, and I think it's because of that resilience existed, because that community bond existed, and so it's something that we have to cultivate, and we have to find our geographic community and center ourselves in many ways. And then another thing we had talked about is the politicizing of language that is occurring, that the way you speak throws you into one camp or another camp, and you're an enemy or you're one of us. And the thing is that we had talked about the need to keep focused on the outcomes, regardless of the language that is utilized. And sometimes that's going to take, a lot of energy of us to shut down our egos and continue, the good work going forward, and not find only one path to that work, but there are a myriad of paths that you could go to still establish a good work. And I think at the very end, we all want the good work to happen. It's just a matter of how it happens. And so we had some discussion about that. And then also about, what happens when the guardrails go away. And I talked about my experience with COVID, and trying to run a 24/7 water treatment operation and flood protection operation when everybody had to keep away from each other. And so the SOPs, the legal ramifications, everything went out the window. And it was scary, and we had to be creative. But at the same time, it was very liberating to look at things with a new perspective and start again. And so maybe anybody else in the group, Nick, Eileen, Albert, want to chime in?
No, you did great.
And so, Melissa, I think you're our final group. Thank you.
Yeah, I was with Gary and Paul, so I'll just kind of throw out some top tenets because, as you know, in our breakout groups, conversations go like this before the full idea comes out of it. But one thing raising up, I was thinking is that like also that we're not necessarily building for like one future, or building kind of the adaptive capacity within the system and seeing characteristics of communities that I think can navigate chaos really are those which are these points that we've touched on, are like strong relationships. And that's like with self, with each other, and with the planet and its resources, and also distributed kind of skills, which I'll elaborate just a little bit more in the idea also of kind of practice of making decisions together. So all of that kind of distilling down to more, I heard, I think Odin said the place-based, more of as the larger systems may crumble, how do the smaller connective units raise up to be able to kind of foster that creative thinking for new systems, and that building kind of more of the local capacity, and also I think recognizing the power of the polarization, and how do we each not get so spun out or caught into that, and recognizing more of that collective humanity that is amongst us, and we just as being a human species together, and also looking at the kind of centralized versus decentralized ways of well, systems. When I say systems, that could be energy, it could be water, it could be food, and how to have the cohesion rather than competitiveness between centralized and decentralized systems, and to build kind of, are there bridges between that could support kind of more local or place-based or decentralized systems raising up out of that, and that from that also, of course, we spoke about complexity, and just acknowledging the complexity that's inherent in these issues and in our society, and how to both recognize the complexity and the interconnectedness, and also work within kind of the smaller local scale, I mean, focus. And part of that too is knowledge, I mean, data and resource sharing across that can kind of help raise up or at least strengthen, and kind of governance being always, I think, not always, but governance being a challenge in and of itself. And are there ways like for the new paradigm to emerge that there are kind of, I don't know, like templates or tools that are created that can help folks navigate the governance issues, or navigate other ones instead of reinventing wheels? Is there something to build upon so that we don't get knocked down each entity, or I'm speaking broadly when this could apply in many situations, so that like say each entity or situation doesn't hit a governance barrier, and then that kind of flushes it out. So, and of course we raised out the watershed framework as a great tool. So I will pause there. Thanks.
All right. Did we miss any groups? Awesome. I do want to say it is very heartening how much this just sounds like the Watershed Solutions Network. So that's pretty awesome. I am gonna invite our panelists to to each share some closing thoughts. And I want to actually start with Rick, because I feel like there's this strong thread in most of the group's report outs around the importance of community, and having been up there to your community, like what's the secret sauce, Rick? Like how do you with all of your diverse perspectives, views, interests, like you guys seem to hang together in a way that some regions don't. Like how did you make that happen?
Well, I think the difference might be that we know our neighbors, and so many people that move so often nowadays do not get that connection with their neighbors and friends in the community. When you go to the same school your mom went to, or and you grow in the same groups that your dad and your grandparents went to, I think it brings us closer together. Uh, my wife comes from Orange County. She has a whole different perspective on community, but she never knew that she'd have to go to so many funerals when she married me. And that's because we know everybody and we know what's going on in their lives, and we care for one another. So it is different when you have a connection not only with the people but with the land, with what they do and what's important. I appreciate what Norma had to say, because we're going through some of the same things. We're in a very conservative, of course, rural ag, and that's good in some ways, but it also limits us to a lot of other people, and it's often, and most people would rather stay ignorant than change sometimes, and so I hope this group and just stay on that level. I'm tired of the division that we have in our country and even on our neighbors. And if there's more of one side than the other group doesn't say anything, and the other group seems to use that to their advantage. So we have a lot of problems in the state that we won't fix them, whether one side or the other. At least they won't be fixed right. So I'm very thankful for where I live. And I know there's lots of other great communities. I've had the chance to visit a lot of them in the last year, touring the state as Cattlemen's president. So sometimes I think we're not that far apart if we just sit down and talk. So I appreciate this today, and your willingness to get together with me.
I just for folks who are not in rural communities, one of the most powerful thing is just to show up. I mean, keep showing up, because there's always something to learn. And I have never gone anywhere in California's rural communities and uh, not had folks be appreciative of the fact that I showed up, that I come, I listen, I learn. The other key is, if you're a federal or state or maybe any other kind of leader, show up to listen, not to talk. That's a key component. Thanks, Rick. Felicia or Martha?
No, I just think this was great.
Did
That's
you
all.
learn?
The big group and the small group, all great way to spend time.
Did anything new you learned, or any insight?
I think a lot of it is just reaffirmation of the things that are important, connection, empathy, humility. Um, I think we wavered between optimism and frustration. But I just think the conversations were real and helpful and interesting.
I was going to say the word community can often feel a little bit geographical. And I have this great history, I have on my dad's side. I also went to the same school my dad went to, and I have 5 generations here in the Sacramento Valley on that end. But my mom is an immigrant from Mexico, and I feel just as much community with my mom's family and the immigrant community. That's a migratory community forever. I mean, every generation has been in this, mostly in Arizona, Francisco. But I think that community is really about humanity, and we are lacking humanity certainly in our national politics right now. And even so, when we see some of the local carryings out of a lot of that. So I would just agree with what has been said. And And the other thing I wanted to share that I really agree with is actually what Francisco said about hope, because I have seen, and when you were talking earlier, Felicia, about the drinking water opportunity that came about during the drought, there was a moment when one secretary and another secretary were debating the opportunities that we can move forward. And one secretary basically said he believes it's possible. He hopes for that. And fortunately, the governor went with him on some of these reforms, and it wouldn't have happened if he didn't have any hope. So sometimes we don't have the, the formula or the path or all the details worked out about how we're going to do it. But if we don't have that initial hope, we can never do it. And so it's hard to, have it sometimes, for sure. And that's where the community comes in. But this is a great community here. And thank you for the Watershed Solutions Network for continuing to build on it and bring us back to the humans first introduction, and for letting us have this time to reflect.
Gosh, I don't know. That was a great closing, Martha. I appreciate that. Gosh, I don't want to disrupt. I want us to leave with that. Let's hold on to what Martha just said. But I do want to invite folks to please keep the conversation going when you can. I mean, what I really heard is there's a lot of emotion out there, and that's taxing. I think, take care of yourselves, because we can't do any of this work if we're not taking care of ourselves, processing the emotion. I heard Sharna say she's going to call Ren, because Ren was was like giving, that's what this network is for us to be able to reach out to each other when we need that little boost, we need that little pep talk, we need that little reminder. Um, And then let's keep challenging ourselves to imagine what's next. Because along with hope, we also have to be imagining, because somebody had to imagine the components, which I think in safe drinking water we're still imagining. But imagine, reach as far as you can, because imagination costs you nothing. And share those ideas and creations you have, because I mean, who knows when the opportunity is going to present itself. Safe drinking water, Sigma, what has gone well in the Delta, all of that was somebody's hip pocket idea that they had done a little talking to people about, a little brainstorming over, a little workshopping that they had ready to go to pull out of their pocket to say, let's start here. Like everyone has said, though, too, don't be so attached to that, because it's whatever it is not going to be that idea, but that idea is what starts a conversation in a place that helps us grow or holds us back. So please keep imagining. And I'm so glad all of you took the time to hang out with us this afternoon. If you have ideas for other workshops, please send them in. We have a couple of workshops coming up that Joan or Alyssa are going to mention. Alyssa?
Yeah, so we have a watershed framework workshop coming up. It'll most likely be on November 6th with Paul Rowan, Trina Cunningham, some local leaders in the Upper Feather River watershed, as well as some folks from the Metropolitan Water District.
And Nick.
And
And then we have in the works, we have a panel that's coming together with a group of tribal leaders to talk about, it's actually they're gonna have a conversation about what it's like trying to work with agencies and other folks. And they're gonna allow our workshop participants to be flies on the wall, just to listen and to hear, from within those perspectives, without any need for them to frame it for us or speak our language. We're going to listen to their reflections. So we hope you'll join us again. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your afternoon.